Now we've done a lot of talking about this engine. Let's do some serious running footage here. I'll make some different adjustments so that you can see the way that the engine itself works. First thing that we ought to do is we ought to come up here and turn on the oiler, which we do by lifting this. And we're going to look in this little window here, which I don't know. I'm going to try to get a shot so you can see the drip. There's a drip dripping inside that little sight glass. That drip's a bit too fast. So I'm actually going to screw this in a little bit, a couple clicks, till the drip slows down. Maybe 1 or 2 drips every 8 to 10 seconds is good. That's a pretty nice speed right there. Good oil adjustment on a cylinder oiler right there. You always want to check your oiler adjustments because oil are these engines' best friend. A lot of people think, oh, they're really oily, they're really dirty. They've got all that dirt and oil and grease. But you have to make a distinction, because oil and grease are really very beautiful things. They are what preserve these engines. They're what make these engines run as long as they run. We'll give these grease cups, which have grease in them, a little twist. We'll come up here, we'll give this grease cup a little twist. Give this grease cup a little twist here on this other rod bearing. Here's your main bearings, there's your crank bearing. Give those a little twist, and I'll come up here and I will mix my fuel, which I'll actually open my fuel valve here. A couple of turns. Well, actually it's about half a turn. I'll close my air, which will suck the fuel out of the tank. This is my advanced retard, which actually changes where the spark happens in relation to where the piston and the crankshaft are in their rotational cycle. We'll talk about timing later in our ignition system video. Now, one of the things we should do is make sure that's retarded, because when you go to crank this, if it's not retarded, it can backfire and push up on you the other direction, hurting your wrist. So we'll go ahead and we'll give her a little spin here. See if we can get her to go. Should go pretty quick. There it is. Come up here and I'll open my fuel. Open my air, rather, on the mixer. Now that it's running, I can come up here and advance my spark. Next time that moves, I'll slide that. There we go. Slide that down in. We should be able to hear a major difference in how this engine behaves from advanced timing to retarded timing. I'll go ahead and retard the timing, which means make it later. And you'll hear how long it coasts. Now we'll go ahead and advance the timing. You can hear it hit significantly harder. You can pretty much see everything that's going on here from this angle. Our fuel's being sucked in, our fuel's being mixed. And we can change this fuel mixture if you like. If I start turning the fuel down, eventually after the fuel gets sucked out of here, it'll take 2 gulps. There's still 1 gulp there. It's getting weaker and weaker as the fuel. There was 2 tries, it sucked twice there. Sucked twice there. We know the fuel's not quite right. It's gotten what we would call too lean. So we can adjust that a couple different ways. We can turn the fuel up, or we can close the air. However we accomplish getting more fuel, it's so lean that it's stalled out. Now we can go ahead and accomplish that a couple different ways. We'll turn the fuel up here on the knob just a little bit. That's all it takes. These engines are pretty touchy. You just need to make some small adjustments and then try again. Usually some small adjustments are all it takes with these in order to get them straightened out. There we go. Up and running again. Open that up a little bit. Well, this is essentially an engine running. In one of my earlier videos, I talked about governors and how governors work. Well, here's a knob inside of here, which you have to be very careful in touching. If I screw this knob this direction, what it will do is, I'll show you here. What it'll do is it'll tighten this spring. When you tighten this spring on this arm, remember, this arm on the governor is what latches the exhaust valve open. If I hold this in, the engine will eventually stop if I just hold this in. Yeah. That's it. She stopped. So that's the way it works. If I hold that in, that'll stop. Now, I'll go ahead and start it back up. There we go. So, if I increase the tension on this spring, it will require these flyweights back here spinning to exert more force out on this push rod against that spring, which will mean that the engine has to run faster to make those weights fly out with more force. So I'll go ahead and I'll screw this in, and we should hear the engine speed change quite drastically. Now we'll need to go ahead and change our fuel and air mixture. The reason we change our fuel and air mixture is because as things speed up, the conditions, I'll go ahead and shut the fuel off here. Shut the fuel off. And the engine rolls to a stop. I'll turn my governor back down here to a slow speed, and I'll come up here and I'll turn my oiler off. Now, the reason that we fuss with the fuel and air whenever we speed an engine up is because as the engine speeds up, if you can picture it, inside the engine that piston is moving back and forth inside that cylinder very quickly. And the faster it moves on the backward stroke going that direction, the harder it pulls on this intake valve up here. Pushes that intake valve in with the vacuum inside the cylinder and pulls air and fuel up through the carburetor. The faster it pulls the air in the carburetor, the harder it pulls on the little venturi, what they would call a venturi inside there. And it actually changes the fuel mixture. So the faster the piston physically moves, it changes the drafting that the engine has on the carburetor. So modern carburetors are on cars up till the middle 80s or so, even on some of the muscle cars today, are automatic, because whenever you change the speed of the engine, it requires some very different fuel demands, and that's one of the reasons that they're so fiendishly complicated. Well, that's about it for the running display, and we're going to move on to some other stuff here shortly in some future videos. Hope you guys are enjoying.